Hey, hey, everyone. Happy Tuesday afternoon, or maybe morning, or maybe evening, depending on where you are and you're watching this. I'm Allie with The Right Place, Right Time. I'm an author, ghostwriter, and book coach. And with me here today is my team member, colleague, friend, soul sister, Kamika. Welcome, Kamika.
Hi.
Now, some of you who are going to watch this live or catch the replay, remember us going live every day for 12 days in the month of December wearing really crazy things. Today, we're in normal sweaters because where both of us are, it's either snowing or raining. There's a lot of
Yeah.
precipitation happening where where we're located. Um, so today's topic is from administrative assistant to master of memoir and why this matters. So here's the skinny, folks. I've had like 9 lives, it feels like, when it comes to my prior work experience before jumping on the entrepreneurial path and before claiming book coaching ghostwriter as like the things that I was going to do. Um, and I want to spend some time talking about this today. And I brought Kamika on to help me talk about this because it's hard for me to go live when I have nobody to communicate with. Um, but the thing is that yes, I've been a writer my whole life. Yes, I went to school and I got writing degrees. I've been the president of a writing nonprofit, true story. And those 3 things alone are really wonderful for illustrating my skill to potential clients in the writing realm. The thing is that there is so much more that goes into being a coach or being a ghostwriter than just having the ability to know what makes a good book or story or being able to write well. And a lot of people I don't think really understand that and they take that for granted. Or weird things come up in interviews, or I'm like not the first person that somebody has spoken to. I'm like the third ghostwriter they've talked to or the third book coach they've talked to. And what they get out of the conversation with me is very different than what they get out of the conversation with a lot of other people. So I wanted to talk about how I really see my past work lives um, integrating in with what I do now as a coach and a ghostwriter, and why that kind of elevates me above some of the other people who, quite frankly, might be really good at writing, but might not be good at the other things. And again, writing is really important, obviously, especially for a ghostwriter, but it's just not the only thing. So um, Kamika is going to be like my interviewer, and she's like the talk show host, and I get to be the guest, which is really fun. So we hope, though, as you're joining us live, that you'll post into the comments, and we'll be sure to kind of give you a shout out. And if you've got questions or you find something interesting, please share that with us, and we'll comment as we go. All right, Kamika, take it
All
away.
right. Let's go. So, Allie, sorry, let me get my camera together, folks. Um, why do you think it is important to share all of the non-writing related jobs that you've had throughout your career?
Well, so number one, like running a business has nothing to do with writing. Literally nothing. Running a business means you have to be strategic, you have to be organized, you have to take initiative, you have to know how to market, you have to know how to sell. I mean, it's so many things that are beyond just the service that I provide. And while writing is my zone of genius, and that's where I would really like to spend a majority of my time, that is just not possible, right? So a lot of the non-writing related components of my professional background really have helped with running a successful business. And why is that important? Well, because parts of a successful business, from my perspective, are clients being happy. Yes?
It's
Like
very
we want
important.
our customers to feel cared for and seen and heard and valued. And we want them to have a really great customer experience from the moment that they find out about us all the way through finishing their work with us, right?
Yeah.
So I could have a really great product, like give them some really good writing at the end of the day, or coach them in a really great way when we're on the call. But like if the whole journey with me has been clunky and horrible, like they probably won't sign, they probably won't stay, and they probably ain't going to send anybody my direction, right? Like,
True.
and that's going to kind of just bottom out all of business if I can't get a recommendation, I can't get word of mouth referrals, right? So, there's a lot to be said for customer service. There's a lot to be said for people skills and communication
Mm-hmm.
skills and a lot of the other skills that go into, having all those hats that you have to wear as a solo entrepreneur. Um, and quite frankly, there's a lot of writers, and I was a student with so many of them that are super creative and brilliant. And like the way that they put a sentence together is amazing. But like, I can almost guarantee like if they were to try to figure out how to create a business out of that, like they would be
Mm-hmm.
stuck, right?
Yeah.
Because they're so creative and they're so visionary that they would have a hard time figuring out the non-creative pieces that are really required. It's almost like I kind of feel like it would be like they would need somebody else to kind of like do all the other pieces and just hand them the piece where they would need to
Right.
write. And even that isn't a winning strategy, but I won't go down that rabbit hole right this second. So I'm really proud to have more than just writing skills, because I think that's what makes this business work, and I think it's what makes the clients that we serve like ultimately very happy, because it's not just what they're receiving for services, it's everything that surrounds their experience with us.
I love it. I agree with that 100%. So moving on. Many of you may know this, or you may not. Hopefully, you watched those lives because we said it a couple times. Allie and I met working at the Women's Studies program in Akron, Ohio. I obviously know the role that you had there, but can you explain how that role is impacting the work that you do today?
Oh my God, women's studies is like my whole heart. And I feel like this was definitely like a critical 3-year period for me in my young adulthood, and continues to be this like taproot in a lot of the things that I believe, or a lot of the things that I continue to try to expand my mind on now. So like women's studies gave me language that I didn't have before. It gave me perspective on the world. It gave me consciousness around social justice issues, diversity, inclusivity. It gave me all the isms, right? Like all of a sudden I could understand racism, sexism, homophobic point of views. Like, I mean, not understand them from like an I agree with it, but
Right.
understand them as in like, okay, there's like a word for that, and there's like a whole body of people who think that way. Um, it gave me a whole different like set of glasses, almost is the best way to really put it. And I think I realized in women's studies how many people were marginalized, how many people were silenced, how many voices we weren't hearing. And probably the biggest mind-blowing one was how much history of people had been overlooked, erased, ignored,
Yeah.
because we were only talking about one main narrative, right?
Yeah.
The white people's narrative, and straight people's narrative,
Yes.
and usually Christian people's narrative. If we were to just like go down the
We could just
identifiers,
hit it. We
right?
could
We
just
just
hit them
hit
all.
the, you know, um, and so how does that relate to what I do now? Well, if you're going to work with a diverse group of people to help them tell their stories, you better freaking know how the world works
Mm,
and what's real in the world, so that you can meet them where they're at. I mean, I
yeah.
can't imagine like working with people who didn't identify the same way that I do and being able to do that successfully if I was naive or ignorant, whatever word you
Yeah.
want to use, to what's really happening for folks in various geographic locations in the United States, in the world at large, based on any number of ways that they identify. So, and memoir, right? So memoir is like my jam. That's what I talk about all the time. And while it's not the only genre that I focus in, like memoir is about life story. Well, how else can we have empathy for somebody else's life story to help them tell it the way that it needs to be told, that's authentic to them, if we can't step outside of our own box into somebody else's for a moment
Yeah.
and consider what that world must look like from their perspective?
I love it. What I heard was I understand people's perspective so I can help them share their voice. Their
Yeah.
voices can actually be heard and spread. So I love that. Um, is there any job that you've had before or even after women's studies um, that help you support clients, or being a memoir coach or a ghostwriter? for what you do today?
I mean, I think so. Women's studies was like language and lens and worldview, and almost like synthesizing a whole bunch of other experiences that I had before that, which is really interesting. Before women's studies, so women's studies was grad school, right? And at that time, I was getting my MFA. But before getting to the University of Akron, I got 2 degrees at a different university for my undergrad. I got a creative writing degree and I got a psych degree.
Mm-hmm.
The psych degree was supposed to be my eventual bread and butter. That was what I thought at the time I was going to go and do. I was going to be a psychologist. And for a while, I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist working with adults with persistent mental illness. So people
Mm-hmm.
with schizophrenia, clinical depression, those types of things. And I was like hell bent that I was going to get into a really badass graduate school to become this PhD earning psychologist, right?
Yeah.
So I had to have internships because I knew that I was a horrible test taker. And so I was like, I'm going to take all the internships. I'm going to get as many internships as I can because I'm going to make my application something that people cannot ignore, regardless if I've got really bad test scores. And so I ended up one summer working at 3 different locations. One was at a community mental health organization that provided casework to adults in the area. They also provided to families and children, but I was in the adult department. And then I was at the domestic violence / rape crisis shelter that was local. And then I was in an assisted living center for the geriatric population. After that summer, I kept 2 of those for the next 2 summers every time I came home. So I had a lot of experience within community mental health as well as rape crisis and domestic violence. I mean, I was seeing my own caseload. I was writing substance and clinical diagnosis reassessments so that adults could continue to get their services through community mental health. I was wearing a beeper at night, at least 1 night a week, taking calls in the middle of the night or going to the hospitals to like basically either channel like a concerned parent's call about their son or daughter being in domestic violent relationship or going to meet women at the hospital because they decided that, you know, well, number one, they were injured, you know, contusions, ligatures, I mean, like bruising, strangulation, broken bones, x-rays, and having to call judges in the middle of the night and get restraining orders. I was working in the shelter, you know, with the women who were living there at the time, who had fled their home and were staying in shelter. And then the geriatric, the assisted living was really more about companionship. But man, I saw a lot of shit.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And I was like in my 20s. I knew nothing about life. I thought that I did. I didn't know anything about life. And all of a sudden, all of like the hardest parts of life were hitting me. Like the people who have to live with the mental illness, the women and children who are fleeing their homes because they're not safe there, the men and women who have kind of been forgotten because they're old. And, you know, the kids and parents and other generations below them or family members either aren't around or don't know what to do with them or don't come to visit regularly, or because of their ailments or maybe their mental health or neurological conditions like Alzheimer's or dementia make it really difficult for family to be there with them, right? It was so sad. It was so sad and so dark. But there's always gonna be a silver lining and a blessing.
Gotta be.
Memoir is about the underbelly of life. Memoir is about human experience. And quite frankly, even when people are not writing memoir and they're working on, like, let's say a nonfiction book for their business, they are still tapping in to something deeply rooted in their own personal experience when they're working on those books.
Of course.
Because they either went towards a certain area of business to follow something that had happened to them that led them in that direction, or they feel called to say something about this particular field or industry because of something personal that has happened. Or for those who are writing self-help or personal motivation or transformational books, they're often relying on their own anecdotes and stories from their lives, you know, to connect back to the material that they want to teach, right? And none of it tends to be the happy-go-lucky shit, because the happy stuff is not the stuff typically that expands us and grows us and boosts us into the next level of being, right? It's
Right.
the hard stuff. It's the
Yeah.
adversity. It's the challenge. So by working in those settings prior to getting to women's studies, I already had like, my eyes were wide open. Like, whoa, life is intense. And, you know, even now in the work that I do, I mean, such a high percentage of people who come to work with me, no matter what kind of book, you know, there's like these patterns that I see. There's
Mm-hmm.
trauma in some direction or way. There's trauma. There's, um, you know, a broken relationship with a parent. There's somebody that they've lost. Um, and there's a lot of abuse, a lot
Yeah.
of unhealthy relationships, and just emotional, physical, sexual, whatever it is, abuse.
Right.
Um, I don't know how I could hold a safe container for people if I didn't have an understanding, one, of those experiences, but two, how our cultural institutions are set up around those experiences, right?
Right.
By being in elderly care, by being in community mental health, by being in domestic violence, rape crisis, you know, I was able to see like not just the person who was struggling with like the symptom or the ailment or the condition or circumstance. I was also seeing how they existed within a system that was created around that particular thing.
Right. Right. Um, when you were talking, I'm a little sidebar from my questions here. It reminded me of that blog post you did about um, people's trauma and finding growth in it and
Yeah.
healing and the art of healing it through it. So yeah, y'all should check out
Yeah.
the blog too. Shameless plug. It's
Yep,
really
shameless
good.
plug. Go check it out. The Heart of
Um,
Memoir, Healing
yeah,
Before Art.
I knew
Yeah.
she would know the title. I'm like, you know the title. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but
But I'm
I
glad
knew
that you
the.
slid that in there. You gave me a good little like,
So moving to the next one. Now I read your book, so I know what happened after you moved back to Vermont and how many steps how many stops you took between women's studies and becoming a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, a business owner, shero, all the things, right? But I don't. Maybe other people don't know that. So can you give us some stopping points that you made along the path to where you are now?
yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about getting a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, or at least through the program that I was in, is that, you know, they didn't do a very good job of explaining how that MFA was going to transfer to jobs and things apart from like very narrow paths, like
Mm.
becoming an adjunct English professor or working for an academic literary like college press, which depending where you live, there's not a lot of options. And even if there were options, it would be pretty competitive to get in.
Right.
So when I knew after grad school I was going to move back to Vermont, I was already limited because there were only so many colleges in this small state. And there weren't really publishing companies or small
Mm.
presses. And there wasn't going to be money in either of those jobs either. Not that money is like, you know, the only thing, but when you're a young adult and you're leaving college for the first time with all of that debt, you know, money's kind of important, you know,
Yeah.
paying the bills. So, you know, instead of trying to find the perfect job that was going to align with the MFA, I found whatever I could find. I found something that I knew that I could do, even if it wasn't my passion. And the first job out of grad school was working for a nonprofit that was working towards preventing child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So this was pretty aligned with my values, some of the other previous work that I'd already done. And because it
Mm-hmm.
was a program coordinator position, it really did work with the work I'd done in women's studies, which a lot of that had to do with
Right.
programming, you know, or curriculum, right? Which was basically
Right.
what this job was, but just in a different topic area. So I did that for a little while. That wasn't the thing. I left there after about a year and a half because I got the opportunity to go work for the one academic publisher in Vermont that was like a hidden gem that I had no idea existed there, though it had been there for a really long time. And it
Mm.
was actually a North American office for a UK based publishing
Oh,
company. And they had been in Vermont as the North American hub for years, decades even.
wow.
But they flew under the radar because their target audience was academics. Um, and so academics, I mean, are all over the place, right? Like, so it's not like they weren't publishing what we would consider trade books, right? The ones that you're often going to go see in the bookstore. They were publishing academic texts for people who are trying to get tenure, basically, is the best way that I can describe it.
Right.
But I got in, I was thrilled. And we could talk about that some more in a minute, but that was short-lived by about 3 years. I was in the marketing side, I was in the editorial side. I loved it. I thought I was going to make my career there. I loved the
Mm.
team I was in. And then we got acquired by a different academic publisher. We were offered the chance to interview for positions that were similar to ours, but we were going to have to relocate. And at that
Mm.
point, I was married and I was pregnant, like
Oh,
super pregnant.
yeah.
Um, so that was not an option. I was devastated. I was going into my first pregnancy and maternity leave with no job, being laid off, and knowing that I needed to spend my maternity leave searching for new employment, which
Right.
sucked. It's not what I
Yeah.
wanted to be doing during the 12 weeks of my baby. Um, but eventually, I found my way into a law firm, which was strange because I had no background in law whatsoever. But I had all of this experience as a marketing coordinator and an editorial assistant, and then the program coordinator. And so this law firm was a small boutique law firm, and they were looking for a marketing and legal assistant.
Mm.
Well, I had done some marketing in the last couple of jobs. I did the assisting thing, right, which we all
Right.
understand to be administrative. Um, okay, like fine. And again, I needed work. I needed
Yeah.
work. And I had a kid. I
Yeah.
needed to contribute to the household income. So I was like, all right, well, this is the opportunity in front of me. It pays better than what I was getting paid at the publishing company, actually. So I guess I'm gonna do it. And the interesting thing about that law firm is that law firm was focused on um, legal representation and intellectual property for entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that the universe put that one in my path specifically, because it was the first nudge or invitation that I got to be like, "Ooh, this is kind of cool what these people do. Like they just like make up their own thing, like have their own business." It's like not like I didn't know what an entrepreneur was before, but
No,
but
I get
constantly
it.
looking
I get it.
constantly looking what these people were doing around me. I was like, man, there's like some really cool people in Vermont doing some really cool
Yeah.
things. Like,
It's when it's
um,
broken down for you. You're like, oh yeah,
yeah.
duh.
And I'm
Yes,
like,
of
oh,
course.
right. So it kind of gave me this like encouragement, like, well, maybe there's something else, right? And so I thought about different side hustles and I started studying copywriting through AWAI. And I was like, oh, well, maybe if I can study the copywriting on the side, then I can eventually take on some of those clients and eventually make my own business. But the timing wasn't quite right there, and I found my next thing. So a person I'd worked with at the publishing company, she had gone over to a tech startup that was really kind of up and coming in our local area, and they needed an administrative assistant. And she tapped me and said, "Hey, do you want to come over?" Again, pay was better, benefits were better. It got me back to that part of town, like a little bit up from the waterfront, more downtown. Which in Vermont, like in the big city of Burlington, there's a difference. Um, Not a big one, but there's a
It's
difference.
a
So
difference.
there's a difference. And I was really kind of unhappy in the law firm. It
Okay.
was too much. But it gave me that little bit that I needed. And the tech company, they had one portion of it that was creating software for intellectual property and trademark attorneys.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, well, the universe works in mysterious ways. So I was just at a
Yeah.
boutique law firm. Now I'm at a tech company that serves these types of lawyers, but in bigger offices. Um, and that was really like the last stop, before jumping on the entrepreneurial path. And if you read Dear Universe, I get it now. Shameless plug number two. Uh, then you hear this whole story and you understand how that job bottoms out and I move on and I start my own business. But like understanding a little bit of legalese, man, like I didn't think that was going to help me, but it did. It helped me when it came to like knowing how I needed a contract, what kind of legalese to have in it, like how to talk to a lawyer when I needed somebody to look at my contracts. Understanding a little bit more about intellectual property and trademark, kind of important when you're in a business that has to do with writing and copyright.
Yes.
The academic publishing company, I did a lot of permission stuff, like looking through people's permissions when they wanted to use visuals in their books to make sure that they went and had gotten all of the right copyright permissions to use that visual in their book. So I had that kind of knowledge, being an administrative assistant wasn't glorious. And at times it was downright frustrating and even diminishing and degrading, to be perfectly honest, because of the culture there.
Yeah.
But the lesson there, I think, for me was in doing things that were so easy for me and didn't take a lot of brain power for me, that didn't feel challenging to me. I was able to see how much more I could do.
Right.
And if I could handle all those other little administrative tasks and multitask and get all the things done and whatever, like there was a little bit of like almost like gaining confidence by being put down.
Yeah.
Oh, you're telling me that I can't, but I can.
Yeah.
And so, all of these different sectors have offered little pieces here and there, and like I could drill it all down to the details, but that's not the point. So
I love that you brought up the book, because I totally was going to say, I don't know if anybody else keeps hearing her say, the universe brought me here. There's a whole book about how the universe brought Allie to where she is, and you should check it out, definitely. So the last question that I have for you is, circling back to the publishing job,
yeah.
what did you take from that to bring into your own business?
Well, so, I mean, working for an academic publisher, both on the marketing side and the editorial side, gave me an inside perspective on a traditional publishing operation. Like, they're not a traditional publisher in the same way that like a Simon Schuster or Penguin Random House operates, because they do trade books, but traditional in that, there's a query process. There's, somebody on the other side in the department deciding whether or not that book proposal is a good enough book proposal. There's somebody deciding on the contract with that author. There's a much longer publishing timeline. So it was definitely an inside view of a traditional publisher, but then focused in academia. But then also to understand like how much or how little a traditional publisher offers their author by way of marketing, and how we were strapped to certain budgets or certain like positions around books based on what had been published in the last year, and how quickly books in traditional like go from like front list, which means they've just been recently published, to backlist. Meaning they're like no longer important or relevant. And that's basically just by the fact that they were published a year ago, because that's how many new books like come through the circuit. And you can't, unless those backlist books are really selling well, you can't put your dollars into focusing on promoting them, because you've got the new set of books now to like push out into the world. It was also shocking like how few an academic book like the ones that we were creating would actually sell for an author. Because I learned that like these types of academic books were really being sold to other academics. Again, they're not trade books, right? Like when you're writing like, 18th century weapons used in warfare within India.
Right.
Like, I don't know, I'm like making up that title, but like, I mean, that's like a super narrow focus area, right? So it's going to be really great for the person, the academic who's researched that to death and made that their niche, but like, it's only going to be interesting or relevant to like other academics who might be studying in that area.
Right.
And a lot of these people that were publishing were really doing it to get tenure at their university, right? So I learned some things about the traditional market that were surprising, not comforting. But then I also learned about how to check a manuscript really carefully for the details. So, we had a submission guideline list. The authors, when they sent in their manuscript, needed to check off certain things, have
Mm-hmm.
permissions, have everything formatted a certain way, right? It was my job to check that they handed everything over that they needed to. And if they didn't, to go back to them, right?
Right.
The other part of my job in the editorial department was actually reaching out to endorsers on their behalf to get those people's blurbs on the back cover of their books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, through both of these processes, like checking the manuscripts for all the things and reaching out to endorsers on behalf of our authors, I learned ways that I could systemize and automate what I was doing. If I
Nice.
was constantly going to be emailing people with the same language, why not create an email template?
Right.
If I'm going to constantly be checking the same things every single manuscript, why not create an actual checklist?
Right.
Like, and have it be sectioned off. So I was allowed through that position, being an assistant, to find ways to do my job more effectively and efficiently, which would then open up ways for me to then use my creative side in other areas. So what I think was happening in that time frame was not only was I developing more understanding and knowledge of this particular part of the industry, but I was also learning about business systems and operations, even though I didn't realize I was doing that.
Right. Right.
Um, so it was a really cool experience. I worked with a really great department of women. We did the arts and visual studies list, and literary studies, which was totally my jam. I got to go to conferences. I got to meet with clients and authors face to face. I learned a lot about customer service, in working with authors. So, I mean, like, I pull a lot of the things that I gained from those 3 years in that business over into what I do now. It's just that now who I work with, they're not academics typically. They are writing more trade oriented books, but they're usually going indie or sell for hybrid publishing and less traditional.
Right.
But like, I can still talk about that avenue if they want to talk about that avenue, right? And have that insider scoop.
I love that. I hope through these questions, people learn so much more about you, your business, and how helpful you can be. How helpful your services with the right place, the right time can be for them if they're looking to write a memoir, if they're looking for a writing coach. So hopefully they got a lot of information from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I want people to really take away with the most is when they're going to work with a book coach or a ghostwriter, like, I want people to be tapping into what else have they done? Where else are they coming from? What else do they know about, and how are they using those other skills and industry experiences or perspectives to do the work with their client? Because again, being a good writer is great, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
Knowing how to write a good book is great, but it's not the only thing. Are they going to be organized in their approach with you? Are they going to project manage the work so that you're not chasing them? They're telling you what they need next.
Right.
Are they seeing you, hearing you as a human, as you're, retelling your deepest stories or your, most profound ideas for your thought leadership book? So I really think that people need to ask more questions. They need to get really aligned with the person that they're going to work with on their books. And so, like, this is just one perspective of how, people might look at my, variety of work experience and be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How did she end up over there? Right. But if you dig in with somebody to ask the right questions, you're going to find how those other areas of their life can actually serve the work that they're doing now.
Right.
So we're going to end it there. And I do see that Donald has been following along. I don't know if he's still here. So Donald, thanks for being with us. Sorry that the conversation hasn't given you what you're looking for. So this is going to go up on the YouTube channel for the writing bar. Not the writing bar, for the right place, right time. So it'll be under our questions playlist. And we hope that you get something out of this, but ultimately know who you're working with as your book coach and ghostwriter. Understand what they bring to the table besides words. Thanks, Kamika, for doing this with me.
You're welcome. Bye.